Yo, what's up guys? So today we're going to be doing my 2024 Formula 1 driver lineup predictions. Now, I do want to preface this by saying I don't think there's going to be many driver changes next year due to a lot of people's contracts running out the following year in 2025. And I'd rather just be realistic with my predictions rather than trying to make an outrageous guess that's unlikely to happen. So we're going to go through each team. I'm going to discuss each driver that's currently at that team and then the options I think that team has in terms of other drivers. But let's have some fun discussing all the possibilities coming into next year, because who knows, we might get another crazy year where everyone just breaks their contracts and moves everywhere like we saw last year with Fernando Alonso and Piastri and whatnot. So yeah, let's get into it. So starting on off with Ferrari, Leclerc currently has a contract until 2024, so the likelihood of him leaving or getting replaced next year is just unlikely, especially with how his performance has been and how he's openly been saying how he wants to re-sign with Ferrari for the future years. I think he's a driver who wants to stay at Ferrari and win a championship there. Obviously, if other opportunities open up, he will take a look. But as for 2024, I just think it's very, very unlikely. Then we've got Sainz. He's also got a contract until 2024. Again, performing quite well. The team's happy with him. Openly been saying he wants to look at extending his contract. It's just very unlikely that he'd be dropped or leave the team with his current contract. However, to look at some options that Ferrari do have if they do decide to drop someone or if someone decides to leave, we've got to talk about it. Lando Norris. There's a big rumor going around at the moment that Lando Norris has a pre-contract agreement with Ferrari. This had to have been done at the start of last year because there's no way with the form that Ferrari's been in lately that he would openly want to leave to that team, especially when Red Bull have been open to wanting to sign Lando. But yeah, there's big rumors going around. Maybe this is a possibility. Maybe not for next year, but I still wanted to put it on the list as obviously it is something that could happen if there is some crazy driver market that ends up happening. Another option Ferrari have is Ollie Behrman, Ferrari Academy driver currently in Formula 2. He's only 18 years old and he's doing so well. In my opinion, the best rookie currently in Formula 2. Is it likely that Ferrari would fast track him straight to the team? I'm not sure. I don't think so. If they needed a driver, he's there, but it's likely that Behrman will get pushed into a seat further down the grid just to show that he's capable before moving up to the main team. But I do see this guy at Ferrari in future years. Now, if something crazy does happen in the driver market, someone who I think might go to Ferrari if they needed a driver is Ricciardo. If you didn't know, prior to him going to Renault and McLaren after leaving Red Bull, there was a lot of rumors about him going to Ferrari. Ferrari were interested. He wanted to go to Ferrari because, like, who doesn't want to be at Ferrari, right? If Red Bull don't promote him to the main team and he feels like he's just going to be stuck at AlphaTauri, maybe he'll make the leap to Ferrari if they do want him. Again, not something I see happening next year though, but maybe in the coming years. So for those reasons, I've got Leclerc and Sainz as my predicted lineup for 2024. Very, very unlikely there'll be any changes with them, especially considering their contracts. They're doing well. They're happy at the team's happy with them. But this is a team to keep an eye on in the coming years. Moving on to Mercedes. Now, Hamilton's contract does run out this year. Do I think Hamilton will go to another team? It's very, very unlikely. I think Mercedes has shown over the last 10 years that they are a team that can compete at the top, even recently making good strides. I think it's a big risk for Hamilton to leave a place he's comfortable at to go to a team that's around the same level as them. And I don't see him going to Red Bull. Is he going to retire though? If he's had enough of that Mercedes, had enough of fighting in the midfield, and he's not at the front, maybe he just wants to live his life, I could see him retiring, but I think it's very, very unlikely. I think he really wants to redeem himself after the 2021 season. He wants to get that 8th title, and I can see him staying for another few years to try and get Mercedes back to the top, because what a story that would be. So George Russell signed a 2-year +1 contract when he joined Mercedes. That means his contract technically runs out this year, but whether him or the team get to extend it for 1 year if they met requirements, which I think Russell was doing quite nicely. He's the future of this team once Lewis leaves. Now, to talk about some other options that Mercedes have, we've got to talk about it. All the rumors at the moment about Charles Leclerc having a pre-contract agreement and talks with Mercedes. Again, very interesting stuff. Whether it's true or not, who knows? I can see it being a possibility though. I think if Leclerc does get fed up with Ferrari and they keep dropping down the pecking order, there could be a world where he does go to Mercedes to pair up alongside George Russell. So many things would have to happen for this move to be done, such as Lewis retiring and Mercedes wanting to have a driver compete with George Russell. Another option Mercedes have is their junior driver, Frederick Vesti. He's currently the championship leader in Formula 2, doing very, very well. But would Mercedes fast track him directly to the main team if Lewis was to retire? And has he even proven that he has the talent to be able to do that? It's very, very unlikely. Mercedes don't usually do that with their drivers, as you've seen over the years with Valtteri Bottas, Lewis Hamilton, George Russell. They really, really like to keep it to those core drivers, give them enough time in the car, and just overall, they like to let their drivers develop at a lower field team first. But who knows, again, if he continues to kill it in Formula 2 and there's a crazy driver market, maybe they'll get desperate, but I think that's unlikely. The most likely option, if that does happen, is Mick Schumacher, currently reserve driver for the team. Toto's been saying how much he's loving having Schumacher at the team, fulfilling his role, doing really, really well in the sim. This is definitely a potential option if the driver market were to go absolutely crazy. But Mick struggled in that Haas, and would Mercedes really take the risk to put him in the team? I'd say not. So for those reasons, I've got Hamilton and Russell as my predicted lineup for 2024. Very, very solid lineup. The best driver lineup on the grid, in my opinion. And I really, really hope these two stay at the team for years to come. And I hope Mercedes get back to the top, because seeing these two in a championship fight against each other, against Max, against other teams, would be so good to see. Next up, let's talk about Williams. So I didn't know this, but Albon has a contract until 2024. He's been doing really, really well at Williams. He's showed that he's really, really happy there. He's even gone out and said that he doesn't want to go back to the Red Bull family, which goes to show I don't think he's going to be breaking his contract anytime soon. I don't think the team's going to be dropping him. As for Logan Sargent, his contract does end this year. Now, he is a rookie and he has been doing all right, but not the best. I think there's a lot of pressure on him this season on if he's going to lose a seat or not. And it really does come down to the second half of the season of how well he does. So to look at some options Williams have to replace him. First off, Nick de Vries, obviously just being dropped from AlphaTauri. Now, initially he was going to go to Williams. Would Williams be interested in picking him up to replace Sargent, a driver who has got a lot of experience under his belt and just wasn't comfortable at AlphaTauri? I don't think so. I think it's a big risk. Obviously, he's gone to AlphaTauri and not done well. I think it's better for them to look at a rookie and a driver in Formula 2 who's a bit younger and has that potential to have a higher peak than Nick de Vries has. Another option Williams have is Frederik Vesti. Obviously, again, Williams has their ties to Mercedes. Will Toto Wolff push Vesti into that seat? Obviously, James Vowles just left Mercedes, is now the team principal of Williams, so he knows a lot about Frederik Vesti. I think it really depends on how Vesti does in the second half of this F2 championship, but he's definitely a main contender for that seat. But my prediction for the Williams lineup in 2024 is Albon and Sargent. I think there's a 50-50 chance that Sargent gets dropped and replaced with Frederik Vesti. It all depends on how the second half of the season goes. But I think with Logan being a part of the Williams Driver Academy, I think it would be pretty rough for them to drop him just after 1 year. And I think it would be more beneficial to put Frederik Vesti in a reserve driver role, get that Formula 1 feeling, get in the simulator, give Sargent another year, and then get Vesti in that seat. So yeah, for 2024, I've got Albon and Sargent. Next up, we've got McLaren. Now, Norris is a very hot topic at the moment, but he has got a contract until 2025. For a team to want to buy him out and break his contract, it would cost a lot of money, and I don't think McLaren would want to do that either. Norris has also said he wants to be at McLaren his entire career and win championships with the team, but there is obviously that possibility if McLaren go backwards again and a team like Red Bull want to swoop him up, maybe he will leave and maybe that contract will be broken, but I just think it's very, very unlikely with how big of a contract he's got. Then there's Piastri, got a contract until 2024. Really great to see McLaren giving their drivers multi-year contracts, although as we saw with Daniel Ricciardo, they can be broken. Will they want to break Piastri's contract though? It's very unlikely. He's doing really, really well. Definitely rookie of the year and definitely the best rookie we've seen in a few years now. I think with all the rumors of Lando potentially going elsewhere in a few years, they're definitely going to put a lot of time into Piastri and building him up to be the next Lando Norris for that team. But to look at some options McLaren do have if they do decide to replace someone or if someone does decide to leave, we're going to talk about the two McLaren IndyCar drivers, Pato O'Ward and Alex Palou. To talk about O'Ward first, there was a lot of talk about him joining the grid in the last couple of years, but I think they've faded recently as he's absolutely loving IndyCar. And yeah, I just think he's going to stay there for a few more years. And to be honest, my prediction now is that he'll never come to Formula 1. I think he's very, very happy over at IndyCar. As for Alex Palou, he's also killing it over in IndyCar. And I do see him potentially making his way over to Formula 1 if Lando was to leave the team. Is that going to happen in 2024 though? It's unlikely. Now, I wanted to put a hot prediction out there. Liam Lawson to McLaren. Maybe not in 2024, but if Lando was to leave the team, McLaren have shown they love building up young talent who have proven themselves. And Liam Lawson has proven himself in multiple categories. Formula 2, DTM, Super Formula, reserve driver for Red Bull. And I think especially with him being a New Zealander and McLaren historically being a New Zealand team, maybe this will be a big interest of them. Again, very, very unlikely, but I wanted to throw it out there because if it does happen a few years' time, I want to say that I predicted it. I just feel like everyone was doubting that they'd pick up Oscar Piastri. and they did it. Either way, that's not for 2024 though, but I did want to talk about it. So yeah, not many options for McLaren, and with both their drivers having contracts for the next few years, I think for 2024, McLaren's lineup will be Norris and Piastri once again. A very, very solid lineup. And honestly, in the next few years, we could see these guys be one of the best lineups on the grid. Next up, we've got Red Bull. So Max Verstappen has a contract until 2028. And out of all the drivers on the grid, Max Verstappen would be the driver I'd put the most money on not changing teams in 2024. His contract is just so big. Red Bull's happy with him. He's happy at Red Bull. There's just no chance he goes anywhere next year. And to be honest, until his contract runs out in 2028. As for Sergio Perez, though, now he does have a contract until 2024. But as we know with the Red Bull program, they're very ruthless. They can move people around with AlphaTauri. His seat is definitely up for the taking, especially with his performances of late. So who would Red Bull look to replace him with? First off, ignore the t-shirt and lighting change. I had to re-record a few things. So let's get into the first option. We've got to talk about it. Lando Norris. Red Bull have been very open about how they want him in the team. They think he'd be a perfect match alongside Max, especially considering Max has been very open about not wanting to be in Formula One forever, and they might look at Lando to be that replacement. I do think it's very likely Lando does join Red Bull, but maybe not in 2024. Then there's Yuki Tsunoda. I don't think he's shown enough to prove that he deserves the Red Bull seat, but depending on how he does in the second half of the season and how he does in comparison to Daniel Ricciardo, maybe that opportunity will come for him. But at this stage, I think it's unlikely. Then obviously, there's Daniel Ricciardo. It all depends on how he does in his return to AlphaTauri, whether he wipes Yuki Tsunoda or not. And I think there's a good chance that he does. And honestly, it might open the doors for him to replace Perez. So that's why my prediction for the Red Bull lineup in 2024 is Max Verstappen and Daniel Ricciardo. I think there's a good chance. Maybe it's just the hype train. Maybe it's because I like Daniel. But I feel like all the signs are pointing for him to be back in that seat. And I think there's a good chance Perez continues to do averagely, and Daniel does very, very well at AlphaTauri. I'd love to see this. Let's hope it happens. So, moving on to AlphaTauri. Starting off with Yuki Tsunoda, his contract does end at the end of this year. And again, I think it all depends on how the second half of the season goes for him. He's been very open in the media lately saying that if the Red Bull seat isn't available to him, that he's going to look elsewhere. And there is interest from other teams, as we'll talk about later. There's even a chance he just does badly and he gets replaced by someone we're going to talk about in a minute. It all depends on how the second half of the season goes. Then, we've obviously got Daniel Ricciardo on loan from Red Bull till the end of this year, so obviously his contract ends at the end of this year. Now, I've obviously predicted him to go to the main Red Bull team, but again, it all depends on how the second half of the season goes. We might see him back here at AlphaTauri for another year, but to look at some options to replace either of the two, we've got to talk about the IndyCar guys, Alex Palou and Colton Herta. Now, the IndyCar hype's kind of faded away recently. Last year, Helmut was very keen on getting Colton Herta, but unfortunately, due to super licenses, it didn't work out. And then there's Alex Palou, who Red Bull have shown some interest in, but I just don't think it makes sense anymore with all the Red Bull talent they've got around. And again, that IndyCar hype just kind of died down recently. Then we've got the abundance of Red Bull Juniors. We've got the three rookies, Jack Crawford, Isaac Hudger, and Zane Maloney. I think all three of them definitely need another year in F2. But out of the three, I think Zane Maloney is probably the likely prospect to make it to AlphaTauri in the next few years. But will that happen in 2024? It's quite unlikely. Then we've got Dennis Helger, F3 champion, but he's just kind of had a rough time in F2 the last 2 years. I definitely don't see him getting that AlphaTauri seat next year. Then there's Enzo Fittipaldi, just joined the Red Bull program, doing quite well in F2 the last 2 seasons, and he's definitely the best out of these 5 Red Bull juniors on screen. But I just think it's very, very, very unlikely that he gets that AlphaTauri seat next year. Another option is Alex Albon, obviously killing it at the moment with Williams. Helmut Marko's been very keen about wanting to sign him in the media, but obviously isn't able to due to Williams' contract. I'm sure Red Bull could buy that out, but Albon's been quite open about not wanting to go back to the Red Bull family unless it was at the main team. He just doesn't want to work his way back through AlphaTauri again. Now, a Red Bull Junior we didn't talk about was Ayumu Iwasa. I've given him his own slide because out of all the Red Bull Juniors in F2, I think he's the most likely to get that AlphaTauri seat. He had a great rookie season. He's doing well in his second season. I can see a world where he does get promoted if both Yuki and Daniel leave AlphaTauri. But I just think there's other talent around that they're going to use for that AlphaTauri seat. And I think one more season in F2 would really, really benefit him. And the final Red Bull Junior to talk about is Liam Lawson. Now, I'm a big fan of this guy. Amazing junior career. Had some great results in Formula 2. Went over to DTM and pretty much won the championship. Has now gone off to Super Formula. Is doing very, very well over there with multiple race wins and contending for the title. Has had practice sessions in a Formula 1 car and is a reserve driver for Red Bull Racing. His experience is amazing for his age. And I think he is next in line for that AlphaTauri seat. It all depends on how the second half of the season goes with those Red Bull guys on Formula 1. But his chances are very, very high. And we've obviously got to talk about Sergio Perez. I predicted him to get replaced by Daniel Ricciardo at Red Bull, which means he could go back down to AlphaTauri. Sergio Perez is getting old now. He's got a family. I believe he's just had a new kid as well. Would he really want to go down to the second Red Bull team, a backmarker car? I just can't see it happening. I think for both Perez and Red Bull, it's more beneficial for them to just break the contract, pay him out, and they'll make that money back alone just in Daniel Ricciardo merch. However, we haven't spoken about this yet, but AlphaTauri is being rebranded to something more in line with the Red Bull family next year. And if they do that, maybe they want to have someone with experience like Sergio Perez at the helm. So who knows? Maybe it is a possibility. So with all that said, my prediction for the AlphaTauri lineup in 2024 is Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson. Like I've said a lot already, it all depends on how the second half of this season goes. But I think there's a high chance we could see Liam in the sport. And I just don't think Yuki's at the stage yet where AlphaTauri are ready to drop him. And maybe they want to directly match these two before making any more decisions. Next up, Aston Martin. So Fernando Alonso's contract doesn't run out until 2024. Very unlikely that he would leave or get dropped. He's very happy. The team's happy with him. And I'd love to see this team continue to progress with him. Then we've got Stroll, an unknown contract. In other words, pretty much as soon as his dad and the team decide to drop him, he'll be dropped. Is it likely that could happen? I think so. A lot of people put so much weight on the fact that his dad owns the team, saying that he's never going to be dropped. It's, it'll never happen. But you got to remember, at the end of the day, this is a business, this is a team, and his dad isn't the only one who makes the decision. There's a team of members on the board who make these decisions and people who are hired to look at the performance of these drivers. And currently, Stroll's performance is very, very average. He obviously had the injury at the start of the year, give him a few races to get back up to speed. And that, unfortunately, was when the car was the best. He then just has not delivered since. I think there was one race where he beat Alonso. Other than that, he's been very, very far behind and so far down in the championship for a team that was at the front at the start of the season. So who are some options for Aston Martin if they do want to replace him? Obviously, the reserve driver and Formula 2 champion, Felipe Drugovich. Such a great, talented driver. Had an amazing Formula 2 season. Obviously integrated nicely in the team as a reserve driver. But at the end of the day, Aston Martin is a top tier team who are not afraid to spend a lot of money. If any of the drivers at the top teams become a free agent, you know for a fact Aston Martin will pay them the big bucks to get them. And unfortunately, I don't think Drugovich is going to have the opportunity to have a drive with that mindset that Aston Martin have. Now, another option is Sergio Perez. We obviously spoke before about how I think Perez will get dropped from Red Bull and not go down to AlphaTauri. And if he doesn't retire, a team like Aston Martin would love to swoop him up. Obviously, yes, Perez isn't doing the greatest at Red Bull right now, but he's not comfortable with that team. Look at how good he was when he was at a comfortable team. Racing Point, who Aston Martin used to be. And maybe Aston Martin would love to throw some money at him to get him at that team. The only problem is he's quite old. Fernando Alonso is quite old. That wouldn't be the best pairing. Now, there's been a lot of talks about Yuki Tsunoda going to Aston Martin in the coming years. Obviously, Aston Martin just signed a deal with Honda to be their engine supplier for 2026. And Honda directly back Yuki Tsunoda. Will that happen in 2024 though? I just don't think so. And as you saw before, I have predicted Yuki Tsunoda to stay at AlphaTauri. So with that said, I think Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll will be the driver lineup for 2024. But I wouldn't be surprised if Stroll does get dropped. Next up, let's talk about Alfa Romeo, who won't be called Alfa Romeo next year. They'll be going back to Sauber as the Alfa Romeo deal ends, and they'll be waiting for Audi to come into the sport in 2026. So first off, Bottas has a contract until 2025. I'm not going to lie, this contract now in hindsight was not the best thing they could have done. Don't be wrong, Bottas is a great driver and he's doing all right at the team, but I just think lately he's shown he's not giving his 100% effort, and he's not doing that great either. And he's not delivering to the level that we expect Bottas to do. And for him to be there until 2025, they're missing out on a lot of talent. But is it likely that they drop Bottas with his current performances? Probably not, especially with how big of a contract he's got. And I don't think Bottas wants to leave. But Zhou, his contract does end this year. Don't be wrong, I think Zhou's doing pretty good, but I don't think it's anything fantastic. It's his second year in the sport. I think with the way Bottas is performing, I'd like to see him beating Bottas even more than he is at the moment. And I think depending on how he goes in the second half of this year will determine what Alfa Romeo decide to do. So who are some options they have to replace him? We've got to talk about it. Carlos Sainz. A lot of rumors going around at the moment that Carlos Sainz has a pre-contract agreement with Audi for 2025 or 2026. I definitely think this is a possibility in the future. 2024, Unlikely though. Now, there's obviously Teo Porcher, the Sauber Academy driver. Unfortunately, he's not doing amazing in F2. He is currently second in the championship, but it's his third year. He was expected to be winning by a mile and having much better performances. And I think that's why he's not so much in contention for the seat as he should be. Not to mention, Fred Vasseur was a big advocate for him, and now he's gone to Ferrari. I could definitely see Porcher at Alfa Romeo in 2024, but not as much as the next person I'm about to talk about, Mick Schumacher. Now, he's German. Audi's German. They've been open about how they want to sign a German driver. Recently, though, these talks have kind of faded. They've said they want to focus more on talent than nationality. But I still think the likelihood of them signing Schumacher is high. So, with that said, for 2024, I have predicted Valtteri Bottas and Mick Schumacher at the team. I think Audi are currently looking at Zhou and thinking, we don't see a future with him. He's not doing that great. So, why not put Schumacher in that car? If he does good, sweet. They've got him ready and getting developed for when Audi enter the grid in 2026. If he does bad, then fine. When the big driver market happens in 2025 and 2026, they can swoop up another driver. I just don't see the point of them keeping Zhou for another year if they just got the plans of dropping him in the coming years anyway. Next up, let's talk about Alpine. So Ocon has a contract until 2024. I've said this a lot of times, but I think this is one of the worst contracts that's ever happened in Formula One. Giving a driver like Ocon a 4-year contract, missing out on talent like Fernando Alonso, Oscar Piastri, and many other drivers. I just can't believe it. Is Ocon doing bad though? No, definitely not. But I just don't think he's a top tier talent like other drivers. Either way, he's got a contract until 2024. He's happy at the team's happy with him, and he's doing pretty well. Pierre Gasly also has a contract until 2024. Once again, doing well, happy at the team's happy with him. I think this is a very solid pairing for the years to come. But when that big driver market chaos happens in the next few years, is Alpine going to be happy with their lineup? We'll have to wait and see. But some options Alpine do have if one of their drivers do leave or they want to replace them. We've got Zhou. Obviously, I'm predicting he'll be dropped from Alfa Romeo next year. And if you didn't know, Zhou used to be a Alpine Academy driver. Will he go back to the team, back to his roots? Will Alpine want a young driver that's done pretty well in Formula One? I think it's unlikely. It's definitely possible, but I just think it's unlikely. I don't think he's shown enough in Formula One. And at that point, you may as well keep Ocon or Gasly, right? Another option is Teo Porcher. Obviously, he is a part of the Sauber Academy, but he's French, and Alpine's a French team. They're loving their French drivers at the moment. Maybe they want to give this young guy a chance. Maybe in the future, but I think it's unlikely for 2024. Then they've got their 2 actual Academy drivers, Jack Doohan and Victor Martins. Now, Jack Doohan is kind of struggling in F2 the last 2 years. He's a great talent, but he's just been very unlucky and not performing at his best. Whereas Victor Martins in his rookie year has been doing fantastic. I definitely think he's going to get a seat at Alpine, but with him being a rookie, I just don't see it happening in 2024, especially with Gasly and Ocon's contracts. So with that said, I've obviously predicted Ocon and Gasly to stay at Alpine for 2024. And finally, our last team, Haas. So Kevin Magnussen's contract does run out at the end of this year. He's been getting annihilated by Hülkenberg this year, which is very surprising. I don't know if he's not comfortable with the car. He's just not been performing at his best. Either way, he's not doing terrible, but how much Hülkenberg's outperforming him, specifically in qualifying, is quite insane. Will Magnussen decide to retire? The Haas just has no race pace. Does he see them coming up the grid any further? That's a potential that could happen at the end of this year. Now, Hülkenberg, he's been doing great this year. His contract does run out at the end of this year, but I do believe he has a +1 depending on performance, and he's doing well. I think Haas is happy with him. I think he's happy to be at Haas. I don't think he'll be going anywhere else. So yeah, if he continues to wipe Magnussen, I think he's definitely going to be here next year. So some options Haas have if Magnussen were to retire or they decide to drop Magnussen. Obviously, Guan Yu Zhou, as I mentioned before, I predicted that it would be dropped from Alfa Romeo. I think Haas would be happy to have a driver like Zhou on their team. Experience in Formula One, a younger talent, and brings a lot of money from the Chinese sponsors. There's obviously Sergio Perez. Would Perez want to go to a team like Haas though? Honestly, I could see him retiring rather than going to a back market team like Haas. But we know how much Haas love the older drivers, the more experienced drivers. And we've obviously got Ollie Behrman, I think is the most likely driver to go to Haas. If he continues to do well in Formula 2 like he's currently doing and Ferrari push him into that Haas seat, I think he's a very likely candidate to replace Magnussen. And I think will be one of the only places he'll be able to enter the Formula 1 grid. However, my prediction for 2024 is it's going to stay Magnussen and Hülkenberg. I think both Haas and Ferrari will give Behrman another season in Formula 2 to develop, while they keep these 2 experienced drivers on the team to help develop the car and fix that race pace issue, as Magnussen's not doing that bad anyway, and Hülkenberg's doing a great job. But again, this is a team that might change their lineup depending on what happens with the teams around them. So that wraps up my driver lineup predictions for 2024. I had a bunch of fun doing this on stream and then recording it for a YouTube video. Like I said, not too many predictions this year. I've only got the 3 changes with Daniel Ricciardo going to Red Bull, Liam Lawson going to AlphaTauri, and Mick Schumacher going to Alfa Romeo. Rather than doing these crazy, almost unrealistic predictions and only getting 1 right, I'd rather keep it to 3 predictions and try to get as many right as possible. Let me know down in the comments below which driver changes you guys think will happen in 2024. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.